There is a deeply arrogant, fragile illusion that humanity has nurtured for thousands of years, an illusion built upon wooden planks, towering masts, and eventually thick hulls of modern steel. We stand upon the decks of our great vessels, looking out at the endless horizon, completely convinced that we have conquered the oceans. We foolishly view the surface of the water as a mere road, a vast, flat highway connecting our continents, our cities, and our empires. But the ocean is not a road. It is a titanic, bottomless void, a violently hostile alien universe that covers 70% of our planet. When you set sail, you are not simply traveling. You are voluntarily stepping into the single most massive, terrifyingly isolated prison on Earth. Beneath the fragile, creaking floorboards of your ship lies an unfathomable abyss. Miles and miles of crushing, freezing, pitch-black water. A realm completely devoid of light, where the pressure is immense enough to pulverize human bone into dust in a fraction of a second. To be entirely alone in the exact center of the ocean is a form of psychological claustrophobia that the human mind is utterly ill-equipped to handle. There is nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. Only a thin wooden barrier separating your beating heart from the infinite, silent dark. Nature does not care about your experience, your religion, or your titles. It is a master of erasure. And in the freezing, violent waters of the North Atlantic, it holds the secrets to one of the most chilling, unsolvable maritime mysteries in recorded human history. This is not a tale of violent pirates, bloody mutinies, or legendary sea monsters. The true horror of this story lies in its absolute, terrifying silence. The year was 1872. The biting cold of November was already setting in over the bustling, coal-stained docks of New York City. Moored alongside the chaotic piers was a two-masted merchant brigantine. Her name was the Mary Celeste. She was a beautiful, sturdy vessel, measuring nearly 100 feet in length, built to withstand the punishing gales of the open sea. At her helm was Captain Benjamin Briggs. Briggs was not a reckless adventurer or an untested novice. He was a deeply respected, highly intelligent, and fiercely stoic 37-year-old mariner. He was a man of strict logic and unwavering faith, a man who commanded the deep respect of everyone who sailed beneath him. But on this specific voyage, Briggs was carrying something infinitely more precious than any cargo. Accompanying him into the vast unknown was his beloved wife Sarah, and wandering the heavy wooden decks with the blissful, entirely oblivious innocence of a child was their 2-year-old daughter, Sophia. Her small, joyful laughter echoed against the heavy canvas sails, a stark, deeply unsettling contrast to the brutal, unforgiving reality of the open ocean that awaited them. But the Mary Celeste was not a passenger ship. She was a vessel of industry, and deep within the pitch-black windowless belly of her hull, dockworkers were carefully loading a highly specific, exceedingly dangerous cargo. 1,701 heavy wooden barrels. Inside these heavy casks was raw, highly concentrated commercial alcohol. This was not a harmless spirit. It was a highly volatile, highly toxic, and terrifyingly flammable industrial chemical. The heavy wooden hatch covers were firmly sealed shut. The massive iron locks were turned. On November 7th, 1872, the Mary Celeste slipped her moorings, gliding silently away from the safe, illuminated shores of America. She was bound for Genoa, Italy. 10 souls were aboard, 7 experienced crewmen, and the Briggs family of 3. For the first 2 weeks, the immense, terrifying isolation of the Atlantic Ocean was kept at bay by routine. The crew worked the rigging. Sarah played the small melodeon in the captain's cabin. Little Sophia slept safely in her wooden cot. But as the ship sailed deeper into the unforgiving void, the heavy, suffocating reality of their isolation began to close in. By late November, the weather violently turned. The sky darkened into a bruised, rotting purple. The ocean swelled into massive, towering walls of freezing black water that violently slammed against the wooden hull. To survive the punishing weather, the crew was forced to batten down the hatches. Every single window, every vent, every opening to the fresh ocean air was completely sealed shut. The Mary Celeste was no longer a ship. It had become a completely airtight, violently rocking wooden coffin. And down in the deep pitch-black cargo hold, something terrifying was happening. Under the immense violent tossing of the storm, some of the heavy wooden casks had begun to chafe and break. 9 of the 1,701 barrels had ruptured. Slowly, silently, the raw, highly concentrated alcohol began to bleed into the dark, wet bilge water. It did not just leak liquid, it released a thick, heavy, highly toxic, invisible vapor. In the sealed, claustrophobic environment of the ship, this heavy gas began to slowly seep upward through the creaking floorboards. It crept silently into the crew's quarters. It slithered under the door of the captain's cabin. They were breathing it in. With every desperate gasp of stale air in the storm, the toxic fumes were actively attacking their central nervous systems. The fumes caused violent headaches, severe disorientation, and above all, acute, uncontrollable paranoia. Put yourself directly inside the mind of Captain Benjamin Briggs during those endless, terrifying nights. The ship is pitching violently. The ocean is screaming outside. But inside, the air is thick, metallic, and distinctly smells of pure explosive vapor. Briggs, the man of pure logic, begins to realize that he is standing on top of a massive, ticking chemical bomb. A single spark from a dropped lantern, a single strike of static electricity. It would be enough to instantly, violently vaporize his entire ship, his crew, his wife, and his innocent 2-year-old daughter. The psychological pressure was unimaginable. It is the purest, most agonizing form of claustrophobia. He was trapped in the middle of a boundless ocean, yet the walls of his reality were violently crushing him from the inside out. Logic slowly begins to fracture. The toxic fumes and the primal terror for his family's safety began to completely overwhelm a lifetime of rational maritime experience. And then, on the terrifying pitch-black night of November 25th, the ultimate breaking point arrived. The exact catalyst will remain forever locked in the silent depths of the sea. Perhaps the storm caused a sudden violent shift in the cargo. Perhaps the alcohol fumes violently expanded, causing a terrifying loud pressure pop that echoed through the hull like a gunshot. In the dead of night, panic, absolute, uncontrollable, animalistic panic, gripped the Mary Celeste. Briggs rushed to the sounding tube to check the water level in the ship's bilge. In his frantic, chemically disoriented state, the heavy wooden measuring rod slipped. The reading was catastrophic. He falsely believed the ship was rapidly taking on water, completely doomed to sink within minutes, or worse, seconds away from a massive, fiery explosion. His mind entirely snapped. The protective, desperate father entirely overpowered the logical captain. He gave the single most fatal, terrifying, and irreversible order a captain can ever give: abandon ship. It was a decision made in pure, unadulterated madness. Leaving a massive, completely seaworthy 98-foot vessel in the middle of a raging ocean to board a tiny, fragile, open rowboat is an act of pure suicide. But terror does not listen to reason. In the screaming wind and absolute blackness of the night, the crew desperately launched the ship's single, tiny lifeboat. 10 terrified people, stumbling blindly in the dark. Sarah clutching crying little Sophia to her chest. Wrapped heavily in dark wool against the freezing rain, they tumbled into the small, violently rocking wooden boat. They did not take food. They did not take extra water. They did not even take their coats. There was no time. They believed the mothership was about to detonate into 1,000 burning splinters. But Briggs, clinging to a final, desperate shred of hope, ordered the crew to tie a heavy, thick halyard rope from the tiny lifeboat directly to the stern of the Mary Celeste. The plan was a desperate gamble. They would trail closely behind the ship in the dark. If she did not explode, they would simply pull themselves back aboard when the fumes cleared. 10 people, crammed shoulder to shoulder in a tiny, fragile shell, violently tossed by towering black waves. They sat there in the freezing rain, staring back at the massive, dark silhouette of their abandoned home, connected only by a single straining rope. The tension was unimaginable. Every creak of the rope was a heavy, terrifying heartbeat. And then, the absolute worst-case scenario materialized from the dark. A sudden violent squall, a localized immense blast of ocean wind, screamed across the surface of the water. It caught the massive, untethered sails of the Mary Celeste. The empty ghost ship immediately violently lunged forward, catching the wind with terrifying power. In the tiny lifeboat, the heavy tow line instantly snapped completely taut. The tension was immense. The thick woven fibers of the rope groaned in agony. The tiny boat was violently jerked forward through the crashing waves. And then, with a sharp, sickening, deafening crack that echoed over the water, the rope violently snapped. Imagine the absolute paralyzing horror of that exact, irreversible millisecond. 10 people, completely defenseless in the dark, watching the massive dark silhouette of the Mary Celeste silently, rapidly accelerate away from them, the sails disappearing perfectly into the heavy black fog. They screamed, a desperate, tearing, horrific chorus of human voices begging the empty ship to come back. But the heavy, damp air of the ocean acted like a sponge, completely absorbing their cries, choking their voices in the dark. Within mere moments, the Mary Celeste vanished completely. And then there was nothing. The absolute darkness in the middle of the Atlantic is not like closing your eyes. It is a physical, suffocating weight. It is a massive, devouring sensory deprivation. They were thousands of miles away from any land. No ship knew they were there. They had no food, no fresh water, no compass. The temperature of the sea air plummeted into the freezing numbers. The profound, crushing silence of the open ocean quickly replaced the violent chaos of their escape. It was the realization of a slow, agonizing, invisible death. Hours turned into an endless, torturous night. The biting cold induced a slow, painful hypothermia. We will never truly know who succumbed to the freezing abyss first. Perhaps it was little Sophia, freezing silently in her devastated mother's arms. Perhaps it was Captain Briggs, his mind completely broken by the horrific realization of what his paranoia had done. They simply drifted, a tiny, insignificant speck of agonizing human suffering, swallowed entirely by the uncaring, infinite black water. 10 days later, December 4th, 1872, the sun was shining brightly over a relatively calm Atlantic. The crew of a passing British vessel, the Dei Gratia, spotted a ship sailing erratically on the horizon. As they pulled closer, the captain peered through his brass spyglass. He recognized the vessel. It was the Mary Celeste, but she was entirely silent. She was yawing wildly in the wind. A small boarding party rowed over and climbed onto the silent wooden deck. What they found there would completely paralyze the maritime world for the next century and a half. It was a scene of absolute, pristine, terrifying perfection. The ship was in perfect condition. She had not exploded. She was not sinking. In the galley, the crew's wet weather gear was still neatly hung on its hooks. In the captain's cabin, Sarah's sewing machine sat quietly on the table. A small child's toy was resting peacefully on the unmade bed. There was not a single drop of blood, not a single sign of a struggle. The ship was a perfectly preserved floating mausoleum. The only things missing from the entire vessel were the ship's logbook, the navigational instruments, and the 10 souls who had once called it home. The broken, frayed end of the massive tow line was still trailing lazily in the water behind the ship, a silent, damning witness to the tragedy. The British courts desperately tried to invent a logical explanation. They accused the Dei Gratia crew of piracy, of murder, of insurance fraud. But humans always desperately need a villain with a face. We cannot easily accept that the greatest killer on Earth is simply a lack of air, a drop in temperature, and a vast, empty space. Nature does not need a motive. It only requires a single fatal mistake in judgment. The Mary Celeste stands as the ultimate monument to the fragility of the human mind. We build our grand illusions of control. We build our massive ships. We write our strict maritime laws. But out there, in the cold, wet, silent dark of the open ocean, our rules cease to exist. The 10 souls of the Mary Celeste were not violently murdered by pirates. They were murdered by the agonizing, suffocating vastness of the planet we claim to rule. Their tiny, insignificant rowboat eventually rotted, sinking quietly into the terrifying depths, joining the millions of other forgotten souls resting in the lightless abyss. The beautiful, terrifying ocean remains exactly as it was millions of years ago, untamed, uncaring, waiting silently in the dark. History is not dead. It is not gone. It only waits patiently, heavily in the crushing deep, to be remembered.